from the I-24 News studios in Times Square in New York. This is Clear Cut with Michelle McCory.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. And it has happened in France again. Authorities say a gunman pledging allegiance to ISIS attacked police and took hostages, killing 3 people and injuring 16 others. French President Macron calling it an Islamist terrorist attack. The 4-hour standoff coming to a deadly end when police killed the terrorist. Among those injured in the attack, French policeman Arnaud Beltrame, who swapped places with a hostage. He is fighting for his life tonight. And this is the first major attack since France lifted its 2-year state of emergency, and it has shaken the tiny town of Trebes, located in the foothills of the Pyrenees Mountains, that's in the south of the country. Correspondent Maggie Rulli has the details.
A dramatic end to a hostage situation in southern France. Police killing the suspect after hours of chaos at a supermarket.
I wish to express my support for all those who are facing this situation, who are experiencing this situation.
Authorities say the suspect began shooting at a group of police officers before barricading off a section of this neighborhood in Trebes, taking dozens of people hostage. Witnesses claim they heard him shouting, Allah Akbar, meaning God is great. After surrounding the shooter, the French Interior Minister has confirmed police shot and killed the suspect.
But he was a lone wolf who acted out his plan on his own this morning.
The suspect has claimed allegiance to the Islamic State and demanded for the release of Salah Abdeslam, the last surviving member of the group that carried out the November 15 attack in Paris that killed 130 people. France has struggled for years with radical Islamic terror, but today's attack marks the first major incident in several months since security forces have gained new powers and cracked down.
That was correspondent Maggie Rulli reporting. Joining me now is I-24 News France correspondent David Benaim and Dr. Judy Josser, founder and president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy. Thank you both for being with us. And Dr. Josser, I'd like to start with you. French authorities are calling this an Islamist terrorist attack. What is your reaction?
Absolutely. And, I was listening to your montage there, and hearing them say lone wolf is just absurd. This is a known wolf. This is a byproduct of the war of ISIS against the West, against modernity. And at the end of the day, these separatists, whether they be individuals or not, they're part of a viral ideology of Islamism, separatism. And on the one hand, you have Macron, who rightly in the past few weeks has been actually engaging and using words like reform, the need to engage reformers, the need to engage against political Islam, and yet we're still hearing them talk about self-radicalized individuals, lone wolves. So there's a huge schizophrenia in the approach there. And the other thing that's really important is this individual shot into a car and then injured and killed one individual, injured another almost fatally, and then started to shoot into police because he wanted to get the attention of police, because ultimately he was working for the Islamic State to try to release Abdeslam from prison. So this is a military operative that engaged with the ISIS authorities in order to try to get his brother released, who's working with him in war. And this is a cell, I'll remind you, that committed an act in November and then had a second act committed in Belgium in March 2016, 4 months later. So these cells are not only threats themselves, but they're protected by a bigger community that are separatists and need deep reforms.
So, Dr. Josser, when you hear Islamic State claiming responsibility for this attack, you think that's accurate?
Absolutely. And when we think responsibility, those of us who've been in the military, we think, oh, was this an operation where they directed it? No, they release viral ideas in which they have magazines and how to operate, in which they say drive cars into crowds, in which they say, become part of the movement against the conspiracy theories that they propagate. So it is like a fuse they light. They don't know where it's going to end up. So there might not be a direct connection, but the ideology does have a point A to point B to point C to this individual.
And it's certainly the ideology that needs to be tackled. David, I want to bring you in here because this attack brings to mind the attack on a Jewish supermarket. This took place in a supermarket. It brings to mind the attack on a Jewish supermarket back in 2015 in Paris. And a number of other attacks have happened since then.
Yeah, and this week is a particularly like a week of anniversary. Unfortunately, yesterday was the anniversary of the attack in Zaventem, the airport in Brussels. And it was also this week the 6-year anniversary of the preschool attack in Toulouse, just a few miles from where it happened this morning. And the process, the way that the terrorist went this morning, his first target was military target, exactly like Mohamed Merah back in 2012. And then he went to attack a supermarket like in 2015. So yes, there is a line of conduct that would remind of what happened in the past, yes.
Now, he is said to have been demanding the release of Salah Abdeslam. Tell us more about him.
He is the only survivor from the Bataclan attack in November 13, 2015, sorry. And so he's in prison right now, waiting for trial in Belgium. He was born in France and he's in Belgium right now. But so, yes, the fact that he asked for the release of Abdeslam means that there is a link. He might be part of a sleeping cell. You have to remember that more than 1,000 French native or that became French citizens went to Syria or Iraq to fight for the Islamic State, that came back after the defeat of the Islamic State, and they are waiting to be awakened into an active cell, and that might be one of them.
Waiting to be awakened. Dr. Justin, we've discussed this before, whether it's Al-Qaeda, whether it's ISIS, whether it's Hamas or Islamic Jihad, that ideology is the same, and there's no way to really tackle it and wipe it out completely, or is there?
The only way to tackle it is to basically address the core Salafi jihadism. And Macron has been talking about reform, but what he's not talking about is really engaging the separatism in which these Muslims that might be not terrorists, but yet they believe in an ideology of an Islamic State identity. They believe in not only ISIS's state, but Islamic republics. I mean, Al-Azhar just yesterday, one of the primary centers, it's sort of like the Vatican of Sunni Islam, came out and said jihad can never be declared by viral movements. It can only be declared by state military apparatuses. So this is what we consider moderation. The only way to defeat it is to say the time for jihad is done. The time for a Muslim military is done. We need to embrace secular governments. And the French government now recently has had a program in which they're trying to figure out what to do with prisoners, because they're realizing that their prisons are radicalizing Muslims that are inside. So they're separating them out of the population, which actually in some ways will make it worse. So the layers of problems, we see international schools of thought out of Al-Azhar saying that jihad's okay as long as it's done by a government which doesn't moderate. And then locally in prisons and elsewhere, we still see separatist ideas. So we have to confront the ideology of theocracy.
Dr. Jasser, the terrorist was shouting Allah Akbar, meaning Allah is the greatest or Allah is great. And that typically serves as confirmation that this is an Islamic terrorist attack. It seems to be the standard during these attacks. Explain why that phrase is used before launching a terrorist attack.
Well, basically, it's a visceral phrase of acknowledging that this individual feels as heinous and evil as this is. It's something that he feels he's doing as an act of worship. I say Allahu Akbar 17, 20 times a day when I'm doing my prayers. So, but I feel it in a humble way, in a way as a moral individual before God, before my community, before my nation. This individual says it as an act of jihad, as an act of violence, of what we see evil. So we have to be careful not to say that that's always terrorism, but we also have to be careful not to just be politically correct and say it means nothing. No, it means that this is an act of religiosity, of Islamist jihadism, and we have to then acknowledge that that's a sign that this needs to be defeated in its root, which is the spiritual driving in which they want to die for jihad and die for the Islamic State apparatus globally.
David, as Dr. Jasser mentioned, there's a problem in the prisons, people being radicalized over there, that Macron has been trying to tackle this, and he has implemented an anti-terror law. It was very controversial. A lot of critics. Explain why.
The reason why it's it's controversial is because one of the main subjects during the presidential campaign was, can we remove the citizenship of people that are suspected of terrorism or that became terrorists? The problem is that with Radwan, the terrorist from this morning, Tubim, the problem is that he became a French citizen in 2015. He is American born. What do you do with the fact that he became a French citizen. Like, well, he's dead now, but like we have the case of many of them that become French citizen, and it's not in the law to be able to like remove their citizenship. And also, he was very well known by the intelligence community. We knew that he had the potential to become a terrorist. He was not imminent, but he had the potential. He was controlled by the intelligence community. So that's a huge problem that Macron has to tackle. That's why he wants to bring this law into effect.
Dr. Jasser, is this just a new reality now? Because there seems to be almost a sense of sadly complacency about these attacks. Is just this something that people living in Paris or in New York now just have to deal with?
I can't tell you how important that question is. You know, we cannot let this, France can't let this become a new normal, that somehow, well, this is just sort of that Muslim population has a little radicalism problem and we'll just keep the whack-a-mole program going. The whack-a-mole program is a sign of a deeper cancer, where that cancer isn't just the 10, 12% of the population that's Muslim in France, which is a major percentage, but globally you've got 56 countries that are 1.5 billion people and whose constituency could become part of the vacuum that gets filled in as these dictators go away in the Arab awakening. It could get filled by not only the Khomeinis, as we see in Iran and Hezbollah, but ISIS, by Salafi jihadists in Saudi Arabia as that regime is weak, etc. So at the end of the day, if Muslims don't start to engage against theocracy like the West did a few hundred years ago, we're going to see more radicalization. And the laboratory to push back against this whack-a-mole is in France, is in America, because that's where we can start to reform the ideas, where in Egypt and Saudi Arabia, Iraq, it's much, much harder to do.
Dr. Judy Jasser, thank you very much. Appreciate your analysis. And David Benaim, always good to have you in studio with us.